welcome to the 77th workshop of the CSH-CPR series, and today we are absolutely delighted to have with us Parul Bhandari. Parul has been previously a co-organizer of this workshop, and as co-organizers we usually hold off in presenting our own work until such time as we don't find a speaker, and the good news is we have not had that contingency for a long time, and therefore it is really nice to be able to request Parul and for her to accept to present her work in this workshop, which is on the urban landscape of love and marriage, and a study of the middle class. Though over lunch the discussion that we had sort of may make you wonder about the middle class description, but I'll let her sort of elucidate further on that process. Parul is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the co-organizer of the workshop, which is the CSH, and before that she finished a degree at Cambridge and has been on the faculty at both the Delhi School of Economics and IIT Delhi. And her interests, as you can see, involve marriage and kinship and social meanings of money, or as she likes to call it, the secret life of money, so far only in Delhi. So Parul, floor is yours. You know the rules. 45 minutes roughly for your presentation, and after that, open question time.
Thank you very much, Parthur. Is this fine for the... Okay, brilliant. So I have to admit that I'm really not a social geographer, and being a co-organizer for this workshop, I understand the history really, where many of the speakers have been either urban planners, social geographers, and of course sociologists as well. I have tweaked my work, which was largely more anthropological, to fit into some sort of framework for this workshop. So yes, just sort of to preempt that. And I will in due course, or probably whilst the question answer round, clarify the use of the term middle class. Now, I begin this talk by drawing your attention to this really fabulous book called Ishq Mein Sheher Hona by a Hindi journalist, Ravish Kumar. Really a fantastic book. Literally translated as Love in the City. What Ravish Kumar has done in this book is chronicled about 80 short stories of how it is like to experience love in the city, but not necessarily Ishq Mein Sheher Hona, not Sheher Mein Ishq Hona, exactly. And that is where the catch actually is, because what he's saying is I don't want to really look at only the experiences of love and only the experiences of city, but how the experiences of love in city are constituted by being in love and by being in city. So he does this by shifting attention to the multiple spaces through the city in which the couples romance and love. These spaces, he explains, are nestled in the urban jungle, the public spaces, including metro stations, pillars on metro stations, cuddling under Moolchand flyovers. So he basically explains the physicality of the city and how that informs your feelings of love and how that is really changing. In one very sweet short story, he mentions how the girlfriend tells to the boyfriend, you always take me to these monuments, Humayun monuments and all of that. Why don't we go to Select City Mall? There is a pillar there on the 3rd floor. Let's stand beside that pillar and carve our names on that pillar. So in this way, he's really changing your focus from the city that experiences love and romance in monuments or in open spaces to a city now that is also experiencing this romance in the new monuments, one can say. I just want to quote from the review of this book in Hindi, so I apologize for those who don't understand. I'll probably paraphrase it. ये कहानियाँ उस छोटे और मासूम प्यार की मनस्थितियाँ को बताती हैं जिसमें दो जवान दिल मिलना तो चाहते हैं, लेकिन उनका मिलना भी शहर की भीड़ भाड़ भरी जिंदगी में खोया है, जहाँ प्रेमी को अपनी प्रेमिका की आंखें चांद तारे ना दिखकर किसी घंटाघर की घड़ी की तरह दिखती हैं। उसके बालों में उंगलियां फहराते हुए उसे लगता है कि वह शहर की उस पुलिया को पार कर रहा है जिसे कमबख्त मेट्रो ने एक स्टेशन से दूसरे स्टेशन तक जोड़ दिया है। साथ ही कोस रहा है कि अब मिलने का सफ़र और भी छोटा हो गया है। ऐसे में प्रेमी अपने प्रेमिका को ही अपना शहर मानने लगता है। Right? So basically, how the lover finds his city in his love, in his girlfriend. Now, my talk is juxtaposed to this position, because what I am going to take you through is not how the lovers want to enter the space of the Select City mall to just occupy a wall, but instead how they consume there, and how their love comes to define the consumption of the Delhi, the new Delhi that they aspire to be a part of and probably are a part of. In doing this and in taking you through this journey, I explain the construction of a middle class identity, a particular kind of middle class identity, through these experiences of being urban. To put it differently, I explain how the urban experiences enable being a particular kind of middle class. And therefore, I just want to plug in, I'm using the word broadly middle class here because my sample population included people from various kinds of backgrounds of middle classness, from children of civil servants to children of small or big businessmen to children of small or big farmers. But how they come together in the city and experience a kind of self-fashioning of being middle class. Now, I explain this through two aspects. The talk is divided into two. The first will focus on the physicality of the city, the experiences of romance and intimacy, arguing the spaces that they occupy come to inform their middle class identities, and the spaces in turn also become middle class spaces. The second part, I focus on the self-imaginings, self-fashionings of those who do not belong to Delhi, but are migrated to Delhi in pursuit of education or professional motives. However, I explain their transformative processes from being non-Delhi to Delhi and what that really entails, arguing that the process of transformation is largely confined to being middle class, a kind of middle class that they see Delhi to be. As I've briefly said, this is based out of my PhD. I used largely qualitative methodology, interviewed about 100 young men and women aged between 24 and 32. They were either in the process of spouse selection, so engaged or recently married, or single and looking for somebody. So now, of course, to narrow down who these middle class would be, I focused on 3 education institutions, one engineering institute, one MBA institute, sort of general university, and 2 multinational companies. The sample was not controlled in terms of caste, also in a way to see what really is the caste background of the people who are this new middle class professional elites. And it wouldn't be a surprise to see that of the 100, only 3 belonged to SC, ST, and OBC category. So I begin with the first part, which I call the consumerist fantasies of love. Christian Brossius, in her recent book, India's Middle Class, New Forms of Urban Leisure, Consumption and Prosperity, states, the dramatic speed at which India opened up to the world market and economic growth has also contributed to the production of new lifestyles that allow members of the new middle class to both adapt to this change in terms of mobility and flexibility, and learn, I want to focus here, and learn to perform and display the newly gained wealth and confidence. One of the most obvious testing grounds and stages of new lifestyles are the city, media, and religious practices. Another anthropologist, Rachel Dwyer, who works on cinema, says that from the 1990s, the middle class, the cinema was largely seemed to cater to the middle classes. She says that it was essentially the appeal of these movies was consumerist fantasies of travel, clothes, and lifestyle that can be enjoyed by the gym-toned global Indian youth who moves freely around the world. So I'm looking at the consumerist fantasies that enable the tryst of romance for this particular middle class and those who want to be seen as middle class. Whilst conducting fieldwork, I became acutely aware of the emerging spatial and experiential dimension of intimacy. Amidst large gatherings were sites of couples who were engrossed either in deep conversations, at time affectionate, at other time quarrelsome, most often in coffee houses. These activities, simplistic as they might seem, had a certain therapeutic dimension about them, as they were able to corner off these 2 individuals from family pressures of work, and really engage in some sort of intimacy. At times, these couples would be holding hands, perhaps exchanging a peck or few, looking into each other's eyes. But what is interesting, and in that different from Ravish Kumar's chronicles, is that this did not happen in the open spaces of gardens. Instead, in the closed-off spaces of restaurants, pubs, cafes. The coffee shops were important markers of this new middle-class identity. Now, these coffee shops ranged in their specialization, from global chains of Costa Coffee to the recent new entrant of Starbucks, really the global symbol of being middle-class Starbucks, to the more niche coffee houses in the bourgeois Khan market or the hip but also classy Hoskas village. The coffee shops and the very act or space of meeting over coffee became a quintessentially upper middle class experience of leisure and romance. Decades ago, Habermas wrote of the importance of coffee spaces for the establishment of a public domain and therefore of the political. Contemporary India is witnessing the development of the coffee house space as an enabling phenomenon for it to experience the intimacy and romance and therefore the private on the one hand, but also to develop a public identification of being a new kind of middle class on the other hand. Let me give you a few narratives, excerpts from these narratives. Dhruv, a 28-year-old MBA student I met, explained to me the importance of dating and making first impressions at a date. He said, the first impression really is crucial. You can't take out somebody to a roadside dhaba. Everyone has standard nowadays. They want to dine and wine at the best places. I prefer the global chains, the regular ones, like Costa or Tea Leaf, because you know what you're getting in terms of quality and service. And nowadays, they are everywhere. The setting is good, it is casual, it is not so intimidating for a first date. Now, in explaining his dates, Dhruv is really claiming to me and explaining to me his global self. And he's immediately saying that it is not simply him who's experiencing this, but everyone is. Immediately bringing eye to the fact that the people, the spaces that he occupies are also experiencing the global change. Then he reiterates this sort of boundary by saying, these global chains are everywhere, immediately drawing literally like a physical boundary of the spaces where he will hang out, which are the spaces that are of quality products. Amit, a 30-year-old who's employed at a leading multinational company, provided me a genealogy of sorts in terms of the changes and spaces of his dating trajectory. He narrated that he came from a regular, and I emphasize, a regular middle-class family where his father had a government job and his mother was a school teacher. Whilst growing up, his family had money, but he said we were mindful, we were careful, not that we didn't have money. However, his engineering degree and now his MBA from one of the world's premier institutions located in India puts him, as he says, in a slightly easy position. Keeping his background in mind, he explained the trajectory. He said, see, we're no longer in college where there were budgets and the coolest hangout joint was the local market. We've grown up now. We're earning good money. So why wouldn't we spend it? I like to eat well and be in a place where things are of a certain quality. So naturally, and I emphasize here, so naturally, I would want to go out with someone who also appreciates these new experiences. I wouldn't want to be with the Behenji types. What Amit's perspectives highlight is that for him, his journey from this regular middle class to this new middle class, the MBA middle class, is essentially guided by surplus money and the right ways to consume this money. His colleagues, his friends, probably his experience in traveling, all of that have informed his tastes, and he wants to experience those tastes in the physical spaces of Delhi, which has now been made possible. So therefore, these experiences, these tastes, are reflecting on his newly achieved upper middle class identity, and his partner should also be a part of it. Why should the partner not know this? Another example of a woman, Ashima, also classmate of this MBA guy, Dhruv, she makes it crystal clear when she says, where you go out to drink coffee and have your meals really reflects on your class and status. You wouldn't go to the regular markets and regular joints if you are upper middle class. Even in the malls, you can see what kind of people are going to what kind of joints. It's all about your taste. If a guy takes me out to a dhaba or some Indian restaurant on our first date, be rest assured I will never be seeing him again. These experiences didn't seem far-fetched to me at all. In fact, while sometime around conducting field work, Starbucks had come to India. It was astonishing for me to see on my Facebook all my friends and also some of the interviewees who had checked in their status at Starbucks, accompanying with titles or explanations that completely displayed and conveyed a familiarity with the brand. At last, I can get the best brewed coffee close to my office, exclaimed one. Finally, the best FDI result, said another. My news feed was choked with the performance of intimacy, of experience with Starbucks. The dates, the romances were rarely in Indian restaurants, and most certainly not in the economically and easily available outlets of Haldiram's, Bengali sweets, Nathurams. The commodification of romance was best expressed in the experiences of candlelit dinners at Italian restaurants, and believe me, all my interviewees had experienced this. The experience of romance and intimacy, let me reiterate, the experience of romance and intimacy were almost certainly in global chains and coffee houses and restaurants, and rarely in any of the Indian chains. This is not to say that these couples did not indulge in the mouth-splattering joy of golgappas or jalebi. They surely did. But these were no longer the everyday. They were not something that were part of the intimacy and romance as the everyday. They became the exotic, the Indian exotic. The middle class experienced this to remind themselves of their roots, of their history. Probably any other sort of roadside thing as well, not just the restaurants, but also matra kulchas or chola kulchas that you get outside on the roadside, which many of them had consumed, so it's not that they'd never consumed them, became a rare experience now, a time-bound experience of probably being a student and probably a way of reliving nostalgia. The point is that the romance needed to be rooted in the new, the global, the special, and the tasteful. By occupying a space of familiarity with this lifestyle of the global, the special, the outside, and the taste that came with it, the middle class, and let me reiterate, this special section of the middle class, who can be said to be the professional elites, wanted to claim a global middle class identity, one that explains their upward social mobility rather clearly. Most importantly, these spaces and experiences and enactment of intimacy were crucial ways of self-fashioning to be modern. The ability, the opportunity, and the experience of these intimate spaces and times allowed them to think themselves as being modern and as stakeholders in the project of modern India, and therefore, in a way, also subjects of being modern. Now, a corollary result of occupying these spaces, these restaurants, cafes, pubs, and so on, is an immediate categorization of the open space, the public open space and the not so public open space, the other and the self. To elaborate, an element of crassness or non-classiness was associated with intimacy in public areas such as the parks. Being middle class, and let me emphasize on the term class here, was associated with a particular kind of public and dissociated with another kind of public immediately. The cornered off, the boundary walls of cafes, restaurants, malls came also to contain middle class identities, whereas the open spaces, the truly open spaces of, for example, Lodi Gardens, were something which were not the middle class, which were to be appropriated by those other than the middle class. Apart from my participant observation on leisurely walks in Lodi Gardens, where I could definitely see very many couples engaged in intimate conversations and acts, and certainly they did not belong to the multinational company brigade, the interviewees constantly invoked the public space of the gardens as the immediate other. Sonali, who had finished a post-graduation degree and is working as a consultant with an MNC, whilst in conversation with me, and when I asked her about what aspects of intimacy bothers her, she said, "I'm not into PDA, public display of affection. You know, like those people you see in the open parks, Lodi Gardens, sitting behind rocks and monuments? You know that no decent person would do that. I understand that couples may not necessarily have a private space, but at least have some decency. Don't sit in each other's arms and whatnot in the garden where everyone goes." And this kind of sentiment was present in other interviewees as well, who would often joke with each other, taking jibes at a couple and say, "Oh, you guys should really go to the Lodi Gardens." Or somebody would reprimand the couples and say, "You guys are really behaving like those odd couples who sit on Marine Drive or on these gardens." So what is striking is that sitting with your arms around each other, looking into your lover's eyes, probably exchanging a peck or two, is in itself not considered very awkward. But what makes it awkward is if it is performed by a particular class of people in a particular space. So the issue really is not with the public display of affection, contrary to what Sonali said, but it is about the class position of the couples who are engaging in this intimacy and the space they are occupying and appropriating. So a gentrification of romance and leisure is really what is at play. Now, all these experiences and ideals of intimacy that I've explained to you through the social geography of the city, how do they inform being middle class, and what is it that invokes middle class identities to them? I'd like to summarize them in three aspects. Firstly, in engaging in these experiences of romance, of intimacy that warrant taste and performance of class, what these interviewees are telling to me and to anybody else looking at them is that we come from backgrounds that are financially secure. We can afford to engage in money and romance as the everyday and not simply as a special occasion marking an anniversary or a special moment. Therefore, we are financially secure, we are good to go. Second is, they are of course laying the claim to being modern. The idea of the modern is then tethered to the new, the newness of the experience of taste, in the form of cuisines, in the form of experiences of new spaces, in the form of taste. The romance, interestingly, which is something that, I mean, when you think of romance, and if you would ask sort of not this particular generation, and often which I did, other generation, the idea of romance was somehow, in a very poetic and romantic way, engrossed in the feelings of nostalgia, love, hurt, distance. But for this particular class, it was trapped in the tropes of performance, taste, and display of class. How can you romance without going to these plush restaurants, without taking your girlfriend or boyfriend out to these amazing cafes nestled in Khan Market or Horse Khas village? You possibly cannot. And finally, these experiences of dating and romance have also shifted or changed the landscape of the city in terms of the public. The public space then, the open spaces, become the open spaces that can be appropriated by the non-middle class. And the other kind of public space, which becomes the private, which is the one that is that has boundaries, that is gated, that you require money and taste to enter these public spaces, namely that of restaurants and of cafes. The middle class surely occupies, the middle class and the professional elites are the upper middle class, they surely occupy gardens. I mean, it's not to say that they don't, but for different reasons. To walk, for aesthetic reasons, but not for intimacy. Intimacy is to be experienced in another domain, one that is accessible through money, performance, class, and taste. Let me just take you back to movies, really, Bollywood movies, 60s and 80s that depicted love in cities, and that was really the trope that was catching up. I'm thinking of Tina Monim and Amol Palekar's movie, I think Baaton Baaton Mein, and the title song really tells you the importance of conversation in construction of love, that you experience while you're on a local train from work to home and home to work. Then I'm thinking of Devanand and Nutan's movie Tere Ghar Ke Samne, where their love was immortalized in that famous song Dil Ka Bhavar Kare Pukar, which was shot in Qutub Minar, in the monument. And of course, while building two huge houses, the symbols of middle class identities. But the people I'm talking about are no longer experiencing romance in their journey to work or back from work or in these monuments and so on and so forth. What they're doing is that they're experiencing this romance in plush cafes and restaurants nestled in bourgeois Khan Market or historically important yet the hip Mehrauli and Horse Khas. The capital then, the capital is inextricably linked with the idea of romance for the middle class and upper middle class. In this process, open spaces become spaces for the others. The change in the urban landscape then has primarily affected the self-fashioning of the middle class as they begin to draw stronger boundaries with the non-middle class. The city and its changing landscape offers them the opportunity to consume, and they link this consumption to middle class identity, one that is derived from excluding the others. Now, the second part of my talk, which is on the Delhi and the non-Delhi traits. The word Delhi appeared during my research in various other contexts as well, especially regarding attitudes. So in the first part I'm talking about the spaces of romance and intimacy, and now I'm talking about the attitudes towards romance and intimacy. Invoked both by those who considered themselves from Delhi and from those who did not, these attitudes were either of disdain, aspiration or pride. To someone who did not belong to Delhi and who migrated to the city in pursuit of educational opportunities or professional ambitions, a Delhiite was seen as brutal, relentless, remorseless in the experience of romance and relationships. Almost as though the Delhiite has come to embody what sociologists have talked about, the risk society. The Delhiites as risking their honor, their sexuality and everything for the sake of experiencing relationships one after the other in succession. Now, this thing was, this image was embraced very happily by the Delhiites as well. They didn't seem very apologetic about this image. And the non-Delhiite constantly invoked this image in writing their narratives of their experiences of being in a city that was different, a city that made them feel alienated. But what is interesting is the beginning of this alienation, the beginning of this othering begins from the physical space that the non-Delhiites are occupying, and they connect it to its effect on attitudes. So let me give you examples of that. Athar, who migrated from Allahabad to Delhi, and by the way, all these names are of course pseudonyms, so who migrated from Allahabad to Delhi to pursue a bachelor's degree and is now pursuing a PhD, emphasized to me the importance of space in Delhi. He said, in our town, there are only 2 or 3 places where young couples can meet. Everyone knows everyone, so you really can't have a date as such. He then says that Delhi instead has vast spaces. Here you can sit anywhere, any parks, there's so many of them. People don't really know each other. You could be with one person in the morning and another person in the evening. No one would really know. And best of all, it is also accepted. Rahul, who works with a multinational company after graduating from Delhi University, first moved to the city to pursue his undergraduate degree and then stayed on, and he vividly remembers the scenes from his hostel days, in his initial days, and he says, you get out of the hostel at 9 p.m. and what do you see? Boys clinging onto their mobiles until midnight. I mean, who are they talking to at night? Certainly not their mother for 3 hours. I've known men who would talk to one girl for 1 hour, another girl for another hour, and meet a third girl later on. And what is most striking is that women are like this too. So Rahul exclaimed that he first found all of this to be very odd. But in a few months, he too, he said, made a girlfriend, and he started enjoying the privacy that he was experiencing in the public space of his hostel gardens while talking to her. Vani, who moved to Delhi from Patna for an undergraduate degree and stayed on for higher degrees, exclaimed that her parents and her friends had imprinted a certain imagination of what Delhi people are like before she left. Stay away from Delhi boys, all they want is a physical relationship, she was warned. The first 3 years of her undergraduate degree, Vani was careful in not interacting with any boy without outside the boundaries of friendship. However, soon she did fall for a Delhi guy in that. After much reluctance, she said, she also proceeded to have sex with him. She fell prey, she joked. The relationship is now over because they've moved on and they found other people. However, most crucially, she enjoyed the process of this romance. She enjoyed dressing up to see him. She enjoyed celebrating special occasions with him. She enjoyed discovering the city, the plushness of the city with him, and also leading up to having sex with him. These are all processes, very processes that she was warned against when she came to Delhi. Resistant at first, however, Vani saw herself transform. This phase of transformation from accepting certain practices of romance, however, interestingly, is not necessarily seen as intrinsic to the process of romance itself. It is immediately associated to being Delhi and to occupying Delhi as a space. Usse Dilli ki hawa lag gayi is what something I heard time and time again. This wind of change, this wind of Delhi was indeed catching up with most non-Delhi. In explaining their journey of being Delhi, the non-Delhiites talked about the feeling of happiness and assimilation in occupying spaces that at first they thought to be very alienating. From roadside dhabas, they migrated to Nirulas. From Nirulas, they migrated to Select City Walk. And in due course, they were also occupying those very spaces that came to mark being Delhi. At first apprehensive, judgmental about the use of money in the non-money aspects of life, romance, they too accepted the centrality of money in romance. It seemed, in fact, to me, that it is precisely this, the experience of capital and romance, that is really the dividing line between the Delhi and the non-Delhi when they first arrive. For there are certain ideals that initially might seem that are the dividing ideals between them, but they weren't. And I'm going to focus on 2 such ideals, premarital sex and parental control. Now, my entire research, a typical Delhi boy and girl's experience, it clearly showed, started at school. Their first love, their first holding of hands, kisses probably. All of them were either when they were in school or when they met somebody at the tuition classes. Interestingly, this is no different for the non-Delhi. They also experienced their first sweet romance in tuition classes, actually more than colleges and universities. The Delhiites often consider themselves to be more open about their sexual practices, while the non-Delhiites refrain from painting this picture. The non-Delhiites always, almost unanimously, painted this picture of being sure about monogamy, of fidelity, of commitment. But what was interesting was that after a 3-hour-long interview, they would soon start revealing that they have in fact had many sexual partners, that they have in fact also paid for sex. Now, this image is certainly not different than a Delhi person's experience of romance. Some of them have had paid sex, some of them have experienced sex with multiple partners, whilst there are also those who claim to be sexually liberal but have had very few sexual encounters. So the point therefore is that no matter what their self-image would be, and surely the self-image is different, but the practices are really not that different. So it's really about distinguishing yourself through an image which may or may not be different. The second aspect is parental control. The Delhi youth is often viewed, especially by the non-Delhi youth, to be voraciously individualistic, completely looking at their individual desires and not thinking too much about parental authority and respect. The non-Delhi, on the other hand, emphasize their rootedness in the family, in their city. They're really the sons of the soil in the urban jungle of the city. Yet, of all the 100 interviews that I conducted and the stories of love, there was no elopement. And even those stories that were filled with struggles were only actualized in marriage after the parents had given their consent. In other words, born in Delhi or not, lower or upper middle class, parental consent and approval, if not involvement, were important ideals to achieve a marriage, and one that was immediately associated being middle class. So I just want to come back to this. If not the ideals of marriage that are different, if not the practices of premarital sex that are different, then what is the dividing line between these two? The Delhi and the non-Delhi. Why do the non-Delhi fashion themselves as being different completely? I mean, of course, I'm only, by the way, focusing on the realm of intimacy and romance, not the other aspects, which of course are different. So what is the transformative process that they engage in that creates a homogeneous idea of this particular subsect of middle class? Now, according to my research, it is those middle class ideals that are associated with consumption, taste and performance that are the motivations behind dividing between the Delhi and the non-Delhi, and in turn also become the bridge that gaps the Delhi and the non-Delhi. In other words, it is the marriage of capital with romance that is crucially the defining aspect of being globally middle class, and it is the emulation of this that allows the non-Delhi to experience being Delhi. Let me just give you one more excerpt of this girl called Sneha, who moved from Ranchi to finish her studies and then was employed with a multinational company. She said, everyone scared me about not being like Delhi girls. They are loose. They're too fashionable, they said. Don't become like them. But once I arrived here, I honestly liked the way these girls took care of their looks, clothes, everything. There's something special about the dress up for office. For example, they're all well dressed. Now, I'm also a part of it now. I don't see this to be any different than who I am. This is me. This is how the professionals dress up. Sneha's aspiration was not really to be like a Delhiite, but to be well employed and to become a part of the multinational brigade, really. Her change in style of life, carrying herself, taste, leisure, interests, were all part of what she considered the multinational company employees to do, rather than what simply Delhiites would do. In that sense, the emphasis was on the class aspect of the city. What I'm trying to get at is that surely the Delhi and non-Delhi youth are different in their self-fashioning, but they're also similar, and they're definitely culminating to similar experiences. And all of this is possible because these experiences are deeply embedded in the experiences of the capital and being middle class in the city. The experience of Delhi then is specifically that of a class. I'm not saying that there are no differences in being middle class in Delhi and middle class in another city. Surely there are, and lots of literature talks about that. But what I'm specifically saying is that by way of romance and in delineating certain spaces for romance and in accepting certain practices of romance which warrant an exclusion of the others, the non-Delhiites begin to learn the language of being middle class, a particular kind of middle class in Delhi. Now, the above discussions and all that I've explained to you to connect it to a more philosophical and sociological concept, which I think is crucial to understanding the appropriation of space in urban Delhi, is that of the flaneur. The meanings and conceptualizations of the flaneur has changed from 16th to 17th century onwards. Initially, the flaneur was seen as the stroller, the idler, the loafer, right? But then soon more meanings were associated to this term, also that of sovereignty, also that of being a citizen, also that of being modern and urban. Soon, the flaneur was the urban explorer, the man of leisure, the man of streets. Walter Benjamin goes on to associate modern urban life with the concept of the flaneur as the detective and investigator of the city, encapsulated by the alienation of the city and by its capitalism. Is the non-Delhiite then the flaneur of modern India? The thinker, the space occupier, the idler, the one who investigates, yet one who also desires to be a part of the streets, of the city life. But of course, Walter Benjamin also warned us that there would be a demise of this flaneur with the rise of capital consumption. A capital consumption which makes its people, the urban inhabitant, have an urge to be a part of the crowd, an urge that makes one lose one's individuality. So is occupying Delhi in its middle class spaces, upper middle class spaces, upwardly mobile middle class spaces, a part of flattening, if not loosening, of the individuality, and therefore the flattening of the middle class? That's something that needs to be explored. Now, I would like to invoke another one of my favorite classical sociologists here, George Simmel. George Simmel conceptualized the stranger. The stranger, according to him, is both far and close at the same time. The stranger, by virtue of being unrelated, uninvolved, evokes much trust. The stranger does not matter, for he or she is not involved or concerned, but precisely because of this, the stranger matters, because the stranger can objectify and can objectively look at aspects that otherwise would require some kind of subjective bias. So can we understand the urban space of Delhi, with its restaurants, its consumption, its practices of intimacy, as the stranger for the non-Delhi? The practices of urban are far enough, but also close enough to be models of emulation and consumption. They allow the non-Delhi to distinguish themselves from the Delhi, but in due process also enable them to transform into the Delhi. And this transformation process is what I'm arguing, is an intrinsic part of being middle class in Delhi, a particular kind of middle class. To conclude, it's a long conclusion. George Simmel believed the city to not only have a negative effect on its dwellers, the city could create new social bonds, it could transform existing social relationships. In this talk, I've tried to draw your attention to two aspects. Firstly, that the specific aesthetic and experiential changes to the urban landscape of Delhi have allowed the middle class to self-fashion themselves as a particular kind of middle class by drawing strong boundaries with the other. Secondly, the appropriation of the urban space and its experience has affected the self-fashioning of the non-Delhi. They begin by differentiating themselves from urban space, but also come to occupy that space. To put it differently, the urban space of Delhi is actively transforming the youth's ideals of love, romance, and being middle class, which is now associated more and more with capital and consumption. The experience of intimacy is not unraveling in the crowded spaces of the city, in the streets, in the metros, but in the safe corners of the city, the boundaries, the gated, the ones that are managed by a complete regulation of money and taste. Even those who want to distinguish themselves from this space, however, eventually become a part of this space, as through the experiences of the flaneur and the stranger, as I've alluded to before. This urban space then is that of a particular middle classness, desired, actualized, but rarely ignored. In order to be middle class then, my sample population also aspired, desired to be a Delhi urban class, belonging to Delhi or not. One that is achieved by practicing certain forms of intimacy, by occupying certain spaces of the city, the restaurants, not the parks, and in due process, transforming the spaces and ideals of the city, the restaurants as the private, the parks as the open, money as central in experiencing the intimacy. These experiences of the city and intimacy, therefore, shape middle class identities and, in turn, the geographies, middle class geographies of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Parul. That was nice about capital and the capital. So floor is open. I mean, Delhi, just to remind, I was looking up the numbers a couple of days ago, the average per household income in Delhi per month is now over 1 lakh rupees. So take that with whatever grains of salt you want. That's what the numbers say.